I knew I wasn't good enough to play, but I wanted to go to a school in the Big Ten that had big-time sports. My mom's family's from Chicago, so I'd gone to the Midwest a bunch. I'm from the Boston area. But I remember I walked in here almost on day one and met Rob Hernandez, who is still at the Wisconsin State Journal. He was the sports editor at the time. And, it was a lot of timing. I mean, there was an opening at that time to sort of cover some of the major sports. And right out of the chute, as a freshman, I ended up, I wouldn't say I was the beat writer, but I got a chance to cover football, a little men's basketball, and hockey, which are obviously the three biggest sports here in Madison. So once I got in here, I didn't leave.
Okay. And then, so obviously hockey was a pretty big sport back then. What was the basketball and football team like?
So it's unfortunate because when I was here in the late 80s, the two highest profile sports were really in a downward spiral. That was when they experimented with Don Morton, who came from North Dakota, with his veer offense to try to get that going in the Big Ten, failed miserably. They had some attendance issues at the time at Camp Randall. Everyone obviously came for the fifth quarter and all that, but it was not happening as much as it is today. Basketball-wise, in the old field house, they were sort of a middling team that if they could get the 500 and maybe the NIT, that was a great year. They got pounded consistently by Indiana and Michigan. And those were two programs that they couldn't even see. They were, it was if they were like with Northwestern, that was obviously, if they could beat Northwestern, maybe Minnesota, those were good times. But hockey was the main thing here at the time. I mean, they were the team of record. They were the ones that were competing for a national championship. My senior year, I ended up covering their national title in Detroit in 1990. And then there were the Olympic sports, for lack of a better term. Women's soccer was really good at the time. Track and field, really good. Stephanie Herbst, who ended up being an Olympian, was here at the time. And, there'd be sort of little pockets from the other sports, but really it was everything but football and men's basketball.
All right, and obviously students today, have the memory of the Kentucky game, pretty much the whole run in the last 2 years of just an amazing basketball team. I'm just trying to get a perspective on what it was like with you. What was the Kentucky of maybe like the basketball team when you were covering them?
I would say it was Indiana. And I'm going to go back to my freshman year, just looking at the story in the Daily Cardinal. The 1987 triple overtime game at the old field house. Dean Garrett with a tip-in. This was Steve Alford's senior year. They ended up winning the national championship against Syracuse down in New Orleans. I remember vividly Bob Knight being livid that the game went into triple overtime and he had to do post-game after, mad at ESPN. And I remember his rant in the post-game news conference that they should not be out this late, but they won. And it was a disheartening loss, obviously, for the Badgers, but a great atmosphere. The old barn was rocking at that time, and still, I would say, goes down as one of the greatest games that I saw. I mean, I would say if there's something that I missed out on, it was that I didn't really get the fan experience. I've sort of enjoyed that more later, and I would say it was really cool after the national semifinal victory over Kentucky in Indianapolis. Just hearing the band and hearing them do jump around and sort of a mini fifth quarter at the Lucas Oil Stadium. Those kind of things I kind of missed out on because I was always working. I was in the press box. I was on press row. And so I was very fortunate to go to all these games and covered, if I'm not mistaken, I covered like almost every football game in my entire 4 years, outside of when I think they went to Hawaii once, they went to UNLV, ones that were a big flight away.
Cardinal wasn't going to spring for that then?
No, they did not spring. But we used to drive everywhere. I mean, we drove all over the Big Ten, whether it was Illinois, Michigan, Ohio State, all over the place. We would go to these games, and it'd be a great fun weekend for us, and we would make it a fun weekend. But at the same time, I feel a little bit bad that I didn't have that full fan experience, but I was actually privileged to have the media experience of always being at these games.
With that fan experience, or I guess the media experience, you've been sort of watching the Wisconsin athletic program grow since, I guess it's been like 25 or so years. How's that been like? Seeing Richter come in, then Alvarez, Dick Bennett takes them to the Final Four, Bo Ryan elevates them even more. Just how has that rise really struck you?
It's remarkable. I mean, this program, the school obviously has an incredible tradition. Athletically, it had a major dip, and there's no question that Richter-Alvarez combination on the football athletic department side, post Elroy Hirsch, really saved the athletic department. And on the basketball side, the Stu Jackson, Stan Van Gundy, Dick Bennett, little Brad Soderberg in there, and then obviously Bo took it to another level and put it on the map. I mean, they'd obviously had a brand name, but they were not successful on a regular basis. And now it's a drawing card. I mean, the athletics were not a drawing card when I came here. It was more just the overall experience in State Street and having a great time and a great school. Now the athletics, obviously, I think can be a pull for students as well.
And then while you were covering the basketball team, you sort of mentioned the barn. So obviously the Kohl Center doesn't stretch that far back. What was that atmosphere like over within the field house, right?
I loved it. I mean, it was an old place. Williams Arena in Minnesota is very much like it. If there was a day game, sometimes you'd see this light cracking through, a broken pane or some sort of opening. And it got loud. And obviously the Kohl Center is great and can, match noise with any other venue. But there was a certain charm about the field house. Now, they had to obviously upgrade. They had to get the hockey team under one roof with the basketball teams. Although I will say that covering games at Dane County Coliseum, where people could drink, were completely different. I mean, there was like a whole beer garden. Those were like raucous games. The hockey games every Friday, it was like a Friday, Saturday night series.
Yeah, I've always thought about the field house as sort of a raucous area because I remember it's pretty much only for volleyball now. And they played Penn State. It was like a top 5 matchup, and I was just thinking, and that they couldn't use the upper deck either because it wasn't up to code then, and it was just so. I was imagining it was so loud then. Like, what would be like if it was totally packed, and like say if they took Indiana triple overtime, but then going back, like, can you imagine sort of covering the teams of the past? Because I mean, this has been a great year for UW sports. You've got the Auburn Bowl win. You have pretty much everything the basketball team did up until a certain game. Can you just imagine like covering that as a student journalist? Can you imagine like how it would be different?
No, it's interesting because on one side, when I was here, the hockey team, I think is from what you're talking about, that mirrored football and basketball now, where everything was great and you didn't have to necessarily push and challenge. On the football and basketball side, it got contentious because they were struggling. There were questionable recruiting moves. You could certainly question moves that were made in game. There was definitely a little bit of a pushback from the athletic department. They were financially in trouble. So there were a lot of issues that journalistically, I think, certainly helped me because we challenged and, you do a little more investigative work and all that. Hockey was a little bit more, everything was great. And you're just covering a winner and people love a winner and you get to go obviously to the Frozen Four and all that. So, I think it'd be a little bit different if we're covering these teams now where everything has been so successful.
Yeah. Is there any moment that sort of stands out to you as a boiling over point when you covered them?
I do remember with Elroy Hirsch, we did a series here at the Cardinal on race within the athletic department because it was completely imbalanced. And I remember we had this cover where we had, a shaded face and a white face, and it was a whole sort of look at what had gone on in the athletic department. And he didn't like it. And, he was known to be a little brash. And if I'm not mistaken, me and another reporter, I think we didn't get physically thrown out, but we got thrown out of his office So there was definitely a little bit more of a contentious relationship between the Cardinal and the upper levels of the athletic department back then, because things weren't going well. And when things aren't going well, as you know, people get very defensive. They don't like people peeling back that onion and seeing what's behind it. And so, we were pushing back at the time.
Okay, and then what was it just like working here? We have, obviously the office might have changed a bit on the surface.
Not much.
Yeah. I mean, how does it feel walking through here?
Love it. I love the fact that not much has changed. As I've told some of your colleagues, I learned more in this room than I did on campus. And I credit a lot of the way I think today, and my career, to what happened in these walls. Because I was challenged. I was pushed by my colleagues, who were my peers, who came from different backgrounds, to think differently, to think more critically. I don't know if I hadn't come through here that I'd be the same journalist. I can't tell you that, because I feel like a lot of what happened in these walls helped shape me professionally and personally. I mean, just to think out of the box and to question and to think about everyone. Not that I came from some, closed environment, but my eyes were definitely open to everyone, everything, and, just diversity of all levels while working and hanging out here.
And I think that's definitely sort of common to the Cardinal today. So thank you for joining us. This has been great. So thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.